Hello and welcome to episode 51 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we are talking about the fourth and final major of the Call of Duty League season. We just wrapped up the CDL regular season, the third regular season in the CDL's history. And we have another new major champion, 4 majors this season and 4 champions. Wasn't really expecting this team specifically to win, but we'll get into all of that. And we have a lot to cover about this tournament because it was pretty crazy. A lot of it also had we we really saw a lot about the standings and how they changed over the course of the tournament because as we talked about on last week's episode, 11 of the CDL teams were in contention to make champs, but only 8 teams could make champs. But we'll talk about all of that. But let's check in with Bink. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing well. Like you said, pretty wild weekend of Call of Duty. Um, Obviously, me being close to New York, I was disappointed I didn't go, but I heard great things. Crowd seemed pretty electric, so sounds like it was a banger event to be at, and it was pretty entertaining to watch online too. So we got some stuff to talk about it.
Yeah, we have a lot. I'm gonna pull up the bracket, put it on screen. If you're watching on Twitch, twitch.tv/Ego Chall Podcast. We're also on YouTube as well. If you want to watch the video version. But I brought up the bracket, and this bracket is just completely insane. I mean, we thought that Atlanta Faze, who entered the tournament, they already qualified for champs. They've been the number 1 seed for most of the season so far, despite not winning any of the 3 majors. But they had went to each of the first 3 majors grand finals. They did not get to the major 4 grand finals because they walked into the buzzsaw that was the Los Angeles Thieves in round 1. I looked it up before the show. The Thieves had never beaten Faze since the Thieves came in at the beginning of the 2021 season. They had lost all 8 of their matches previously. So, I think I mentioned on the last episode that I think it was like 0-4, 0-5. The Thieves were against Faze this season. And it's incredible. But the Thieves, they were able to not only beat Faze, but then they swept the Ultra. They did lose to the New York Subliners playing in front of their home crowd, and the Subliners obviously had so much to play for because they needed at least a top 3 finish to qualify for champs, and then some stuff to happen on top of that. But it didn't really seem to matter. They lost to the Subliners, and they were still able to get back to the to the grand finals and win the championship, beating New York in the process. What do you want to talk about in specific to the Thieves? Because this is a team that we've talked about a lot this season, and not in glowing terms, really. We've been a little disappointed about how they played for most of the season. They entered into this tournament very much in danger of missing out on champs because they were hovering around 8th place because of inconsistent placings. But what did you think of LAT's run to the Major 4 championship?
I gotta give him props. It was pretty impressive. All things considered, beating Faze twice, obviously beating them once. When you put into consideration, like you said, they hadn't beaten them as like a franchise since the CDL, since joining CDL. So beating them not once but twice is pretty impressive. It's also impressive they were able to beat the team that beat them in the winners finals back in the grand finals. So multiple cool angles you can look at this from, really. Kenny being named MVP, that there's so much discussion around him and his role between AR versus SMG. So many people wanting to see him back on an SMG. Now he is. He wins an MVP, puts up pretty ridiculous numbers, especially in comparison to some of the other numbers we've seen from him. Um, yeah, it was just really an all around impressive run out of the Thieves, and got to give them props. But I certainly did not see this coming at all. Probably, well, I know at least in predictions on the last show we talked about. In particular, I was looking at Atlanta and New York to take it. I probably would have picked Optic over before I picked the Thieves to win it all, even though they were in the losers bracket. So I don't know. There's at least 3 teams, potentially more, that I would have thought had a better chance to win this tournament than the Thieves heading into it. So, yeah, pretty surprised by that. I think it is noteworthy again that we have another a non-repeat winner here for the 4th major. So all 4 regular season tournaments were won by different teams. When you take into consideration that the 3 previous winners started this event in the losers bracket, that's not necessarily super surprising, but it is worth bringing up. I guess getting a little ahead of myself here, but I definitely wouldn't be surprised if we make it 5 for 5 at champs with another new team taking the big one at the end of the year. So that's getting ahead of ourselves here. But just in general, guess wasn't anything too specific, but just an impressive run for the Thieves, and as you mentioned too, is much needed considering their their place in the CDL point standings, and potentially, obviously, they weren't in as dire need of a massive run as New York was, but the Thieves definitely were in jeopardy of potentially missing champs, but they put that to rest pretty easily, and certainly put it completely to rest by taking the whole thing.
Yeah, the Thieves were shockingly good and consistent for this tournament. They didn't even go to a game 5. Obviously they did in the final, in the grand final, but they beat Faze twice in 4 games. They swept Toronto, and then they lost in 4 games to New York the first time. But it happens. New York was, they had so much momentum coming into this tournament. They had a lot to play for, obviously, like I said, just to qualify for champs. So, it was an incredible tournament, and I'm really surprised that LAT of all teams was able to pull this off. But speaking of Kenny, because you brought up how he won MVP, there's always been questions about him, like in his fit in the team, and this has been over multiple years because this is, he's so good at, being a submachine gun player and being an assault rifle player. There's always kind of questions about where he would fit best in a team, and they've struggled at times to slot him into a position he's comfortable in, and other players are comfortable around him. But he looked in TK form, World War II form, Kenny. He did. He had a 1.09 hard point KD, which was the best on the Thieves. He had a 1.45 S&D KD, which was the best on the team, and then a 1.19 control KD, which was also the best on the team. Just an incredible performance by him throughout the entire tournament. You really can't say enough about him, and this is the Kenny that we all remember. We all think can be the best player in the world at any given time. Like this is why he's been so hyped up for the last 3-4 years. People really expect a lot out of him, and he kind of showed that he can live up to those lofty expectations. And this team, honestly, this is the best. Obviously, is the best they've looked this season, but everybody looked well on this team. It wasn't just Kenny going off and him carrying this team. It was everybody. None of these players had a less than 1.0 KD on the team. The lowest hardpoint KD on the team was tied with Draws and Envoy, who had a 1.06. Like, that's not very common. It's also not like 100% the reason why they're doing so well, but it's also easier to win maps, of course, if you are slaying out everybody and nobody's going negative. It's pretty amazing that they were able to accomplish this. Even in search, nobody had less than a 1.0 KD, and in control, nobody had less than a 1.0 KD. That's incredible. Really a testament to how well they slayed this event. I don't know what the difference is between what we saw for the first 5 months of the season and what we saw with LAT this weekend, and that makes me concerned about, like, is this similar to LAG? Because we saw with LAG they had that incredible run at Major 2, and they didn't do anything really the rest of the season. Obviously, LAT is better than LAG. I don't think anyone would dispute that, and they have performed better on average at every event, probably other than Major Two, than LAG. But with how Vanguard is, I'm not sure if LAT are the team, to actually find consistency, like string together events. Nobody's really been able to do that other than Faze, they haven't been able to like win an event, which is kind of surprising still. So, what do you think about LAT and their chances? I know you said like you have a feeling, like a sneaking suspicion that we might see a fifth tournament winner, but do you think LAT has the potential, or is there something about this team that gives you more confidence in them to do what Optic and LAG and Seattle have not been able to do?
Well, I think, I don't really think it's a hot take to say that potentially another team
Yeah.
could win champs just because with LAG not at champs, that means only 3 tournament winners are there. So that means 5 out of 8 teams at the event haven't won, which means it's more likely
Yeah.
one of them wins than the other. But regardless of that, yeah, I think it's certainly worth mentioning that this is a great time to get hot, and the Thieves potentially beating, or not potentially, they did beat Faze twice, and beating New York, who looked really strong this weekend as well. Um, Based on that, you got to think that they have a good shot and are in a good position. But like you said, Vanguard's going to Vanguard. We saw it most recently just at this event too with Seattle. Seattle wins Major 3, gets last place at Major 4. So, um, inconsistency has been a theme throughout this year for multiple teams. Um, but I do think it's definitely worth mentioning that this is the best we've seen this Thieves roster look unquestionably, and it's the best time for them to be hitting this form if this is their best form. So I still, if I was a betting man and was betting on a team to win champs, I don't think I would have the confidence in Thieves to do that, but they certainly have to be. The other people certainly have to have some confidence heading into the event because you got to assume that Faze is still probably the favorite, and this team just beat Faze twice, so that can't be ignored.
Let's talk about Faze because, like I mentioned earlier in the episode, they made the first three grand finals of the majors so far this season, but they lost in each of those three. And then in Major 4, things were very much up in the air with all of these teams. I didn't think that there was a very clear, well, we disagreed on who we thought would win the tournament, and I didn't have really any confidence in that either of us would be correct when we made our predictions, because you said that your head was saying Faze, but you really wanted New York. I was thinking, oh, like I kind of think the same, but I think New York can pull it off with how they played. But we saw New York falter in the first three majors. They actually hadn't even won a single match at a major heading into this event. And then you had Faze, who have done incredibly well and been the most consistent team probably all season long, but they haven't been able to achieve the same things that we expect of them. So Faze coming into this event, they had already locked up the first, or I don't believe they had locked up the first seed, but they were pretty much almost there. They had locked up a qualifying spot for champs. They were about to lock up the first seed, and they were coming in playing LAT. And like I mentioned, LAT had never beaten Atlanta Faze before, and that's been pretty much 2 entire seasons. I didn't expect it to change, especially since Atlanta had just beaten LAT a few weeks earlier. Of course, Faze loses their first series. It was the only series in round one, winners bracket or losers bracket, that wasn't game five a decider. It was it went to 4 games. All the other first round matchups were 5 games. But Faze, they lose round one. The Paris Legion have the unfortunate duty to finish their season playing Atlanta Faze, which doesn't seem very fun at all. Still a tight series. Faze wins 3-2. They sweep LAG and end their hopes of getting to champs, because an LAG win there could have almost locked up a spot. They do the same to Florida. Florida really needed that extra win to kind of lock up a spot, or at least make it so like New York has to win the tournament. So they beat Florida, and Florida ends up getting knocked out of champs contention because of that. And then they have this big match against Optic, who Optic's been really, really bad lately. One of the worst teams in the last set of qualifying matches as they integrate Illy back into their lineup. They're able to beat Optic, which is really surprising considering Faze has been really bad against this team for pretty much the entire season. It's like one of the two teams that they've struggled with so much this year. But they're able to beat Optic, and then they lose again to LAT in 4 games. What did you make of Faze's run? Because it's, not surprising that they made it so far into the tournament, but they had to do it through the losers bracket, which was pretty surprising.
Yeah, I think it was surprising to me they lost the opening match to the Thieves. Then they go game 5 with Paris, and that was a little concerning to me as well. Kind of an eye opener. But then this middle stretch here against LAG, Florida, and especially Optic, a team they haven't really seen much success against this year, if they have at all. Those 3 series, I was kind of like, a little bit back. I was like, yeah, okay, this is the Phase we expect to see. And then they weren't able to get their revenge against the Thieves. So, I don't, outside of those outliers, I was impressed by that stretch of those 3 matches in the middle. The one thing that stood out to me, and I don't have the exact breakdown of all the maps they played this week, but I just counted really quick based on our results article. They played Tuscan 13 times this weekend. Um, and notably, they played it. It was the first 3 maps in their series against the Thieves in the winners bracket. It was the middle 3 maps in the series against Paris. So obviously, Tuscan is one of those maps that's available in all 3 modes. So that could like inflate these numbers if we were to compare it to other maps.
Mm-hmm.
But that still stands out to me that they played that map in particular 13 times. And obviously, I didn't count all the other maps, so I'm not sure in comparison what the next closest is. But that's just, I felt like when I was watching the tournament that they were playing a lot of Tuscan, and I just checked real quick, and I think that's they ended up playing it 13 times. So maybe I don't want to say, without knowing what the strategy was, but maybe that's just a map they feel like, due to its relevance in Vanguard being in all 3 modes, it was something they wanted to practice at this major heading into champs. Obviously, that's pure speculation because I feel like if we said that last year in Cold War, it wouldn't be surprising because they actually won tournaments and were super dominant last year. So they definitely had some wiggle room, and sure they had wiggle room here because they had eventually locked in the top seed and they were already qualified for champs. But I still feel like because they hadn't won yet this year, they were still trying to win this tournament. Maybe there was some element to practice and trying to, not, I wouldn't say expand the map pool, but maybe just focus in on certain maps to try and improve ahead of champs. But I still feel like that wouldn't, again, could be wrong, but I just feel like due to them not having won, that's less likely than in the position where they were last year, where we saw them win multiple times. And then if they were trying out maps, it's like, oh, okay, I feel like last year, for example, they were trying out Apocalypse towards the end of the year, like more than any other team, because they had won multiple tournaments and they had such a lead where they could do that. And I think it benefited them. I'm pretty sure Apocalypse was the map that they ended up winning champs on in the end. So yeah, I don't know for sure, obviously, but I think that's certainly worth mentioning. They were playing a lot of Tuscan, so when we get to champs, we'll have to see if that's something that pops up again. But yeah, I'm definitely, this is not the most confident I've ever been in Phase. Because like we've talked about on multiple episodes, there were times where it was just, lock in Phase, they're winning this tournament, and it would turn out to be right, or if they didn't, at worst, they got second. Not that third is bad in this sense at all, but they've set a high bar for themselves, and they certainly coming in the champs have a very tough first round matchup against New York, which I'm super excited to see.
Yeah, just to kind of illustrate your point about Tuscan, so that's their most played hardpoint map, but they're not particularly successful on it. So they have a 17-12 record on Tuscan hardpoint throughout the season. That's including all of the events and everything. But like it's pretty like that's good considering they're winning more than half of those maps. But if you look at how well they do on Gavutu and Bokage hardpoint, they're 15-5 on Bokage, 15-7 on Gavutu. So Tuscan, it does seem like they're a Desert Siege, like they or not Desert Siege, Berlin hardpoint. They're not like they try not to play it. It's their most vetoed hardpoint map, so that's pretty much their auto veto. So they're trying to get better at their third best hardpoint, or their worst hardpoint, other than Berlin. So it seems like you probably have a good theory there that they are trying to at least improve their map pool and hope that getting better at Tuscan hardpoint is like a key to victory and hopefully won't lose them. But Tuscan control is their best control map. So, their hardpoint at least seems to be focused on trying to get better on that map, and then control, they're just trying to win it, I guess. But yeah, that's just based on what I was looking at. Tuscan was actually the only control map that they played this weekend, and they're 0-2 on Tuscan Search this weekend, and they're not really good at Tuscan Search, so it's a point of emphasis, but they're not that great at any particular search and destroy map at the moment. So it's an interesting theory, and I'm sure it does have quite a bit of validity for Faze, because it's important. Like you could tell in the Paris Legion series, I didn't think they were playing as like hard or as like intense as we usually see them. Not saying that they were like throwing the series or anything, but I do think when there are not that many stakes for a team, they tend to maybe even subconsciously not give as much effort or bring as much intensity to a match. And I could see, I think that happened with the Paris match, just because Paris was, they've been eliminated from champs contention for a little bit now. Faze probably, they were pretty close to getting the first seed no matter what, so it didn't really matter all that much to them. But they do want to play well. It's a weird thing for Faze, because they've done this at pretty much 2 years running, maybe even 3 years, because I don't really remember like the back end of the 2020 season. That was like peak COVID, and I was not like super locked into what was happening on like London Docks, or not London Docks. What is that map in MW with I don't even know. We're just gonna go back. But Faze, they've been basically testing out maps throughout the season, I'm sure, but they have a much greater advantage to do so now in Major 4, when they don't really have that much to play for. Like Optic had to make a huge run to even give them like any chance at getting the number 1 seed, if they even had a chance. So it made sense for them to do it, and they played super well, all things considered. Getting I think they got 3rd place at this event. Like, for that to be your performance when you had essentially nothing to play for in terms of like improving your seeding or anything, I think that says a lot about the team. And I'm excited to see what they can do at champs now that they've went the entire season without winning a tournament, which seems pretty unfathomable considering how successful they were last season. Let's talk about New York, or not New York. New York. Let's talk about New York. They were the hosts of this tournament. It was in Brooklyn at the King's Theater, I believe. So a lot of New York fans. We even got a Crim 7 appearance, which was very odd. But New York needed quite a bit of wins to make champs. I believe they were 35 points behind 8th place. starting the event. Not like, don't quote me on that, but they needed at least a third place finish. I know that to get to champs, but that was just with everybody losing. Florida, Minnesota, LAG, all of them losing first round, not gaining any points. That didn't happen. Florida, they won their winners bracket round 1 match. LAG won their losers bracket round 1 match. Minnesota, thankfully for New York, did get double first rounded again, and it ended their season. But New York, they went on this incredible run. They beat Minnesota in the first round. Then they beat Florida. And then they beat LAT to get to grand finals, which locked them into 50 CDL points, I believe, which put them, like it guaranteed them a spot in champs because Florida had been knocked out, and LAG and Minnesota had also been knocked out. I'm still stunned that it happened because we talked about it, I think, when we were previewing like the first week or the second week of the major 4 qualifiers. We were talking about like what New York needed to do to you really have a chance, because they only had like 70 CDL points heading in to this set of qualifying matches because they had not won a single match at a major. And they somehow did it. They went 4-1 in qualifying matches, and then even when they're faced with pretty tough odds, like they need a top 3 finish, you need to at least get to the losers finals to even get the necessary points, and then things have to happen if you don't get any further. I think it's incredible. I don't know how much playing in front of your home crowd and the fans, like really cheering them on, trying to will them to victory, I don't know how much that played into it, but an incredible run. Talk me through what you were thinking about NYSL, because we've talked about them a lot over the past few weeks.
Yeah, I was really impressed. I'm happy that it actually came to fruition because it's a super cool storyline. And it almost didn't happen right off the bat. Minnesota jumped out to a 2-0 lead in that series, and then New York has to pull off the reverse sweep to, keep their hopes alive immediately. And then I talked about it in the last show, but I'll just bring it up again because of the way the bracket broke down. It literally worked out as best as as New York could have wanted, aside from Florida actually winning. It would have been more beneficial for them, sure, if Florida had lost that first match, but with Florida winning and having to play New York still controlled their own fate, and getting a 3-0 win there to assert dominance and kind of show like they're not messing around. That was pretty big victory for them to pick up as well. And just like I said, the way it shook down with the bracket and everything, that was the best case scenario for them, with Florida actually winning their opening match. So was super impressed with the squad. I think I feel like at moments like I can think of off the top of my head, there were several moments where Kismet in particular was just absolutely popping off, and that's great. But I feel like there was like maps. I would have to go back and look, obviously, but I feel like there was like standout maps from each player on the team at different times throughout the tournament. And if they get to the finals with that recipe and are, able in this short turnaround here, able to put it together where everybody's just consistently putting up the star performances at the same time, obviously that's really hard to do. But if they're able to do it, that could be their recipe for success heading into champs. And kind of like we're mentioning briefly earlier, just because of the way the CDL point standing shakes out, they're technically the 8th and last seed for champs, which means they have to play Atlanta Faze in the first round of the winners bracket. And on paper, 1 versus 8 might be a tough matchup, but based on how both teams are playing right now, I could honestly see that one going either way, depending on who shows up. So I'm really looking forward to that match, but I am super impressed with New York's run overall. I was expecting them, especially after they beat the Thieves. After they beat the Thieves in the winners finals, I was certainly expecting them to beat them again in the grand finals. and I'd have to go back and look at the results because I know after the first two maps, I kind of like just went into like autopilot and I was like, yeah, this should be over for New York. But it was, the Thieves took both controls in the grand finals there in particular. Obviously, that's a swing mode, but it's only played twice. So that's not like the make or break necessarily, but it's certainly worth mentioning that the Thieves. I feel like the Thieves played well in control all weekend, but obviously taking both maps in the grand finals is helpful. But with New York jumping out to that 2-0 lead, then they play back-to-back Berlins that um, the Thieves take to tie up the grand finals at 2-2. That's huge because I feel like New York gets one of those maps, and if it's 3-1 or 4-0, obviously it's a huge difference compared to 2-2. So big response out of the Thieves there. I think that's probably where things started to shift a little bit, and best of nine's hard with the vetoes and everything like that. But yeah, I think it would benefit everybody if in some way we get another New York Thieves rematch at Champs, just because it was a high octane matchup most recently, and it would probably be a good matchup again, no matter where it happens, if it were to happen at Champs. But I'm just looking forward to seeing this New York team play more in general, I guess.
Yeah, I want to point out for New York, so just their Major Four qualifier matches and the Major Four matches, they were 14-4 in hardpoint. This is a team that could not win a hardpoint in the beginning of the season. And I love Clay, like my favorite player probably of all time. It was a very good move to get him off the roster. Like maybe not him specifically, but being able to bring in Paul and then Kismet at a different point in the season, that has made all of the difference. Both of those players are invaluable to this team. Paul is really in S&D. I think he's incredible. Kismet has looked really, really good in respawns. This team is good. That makes it like it sounds crazy because they've pretty much taken half of their roster out since the beginning of the season. They made those roster moves like really really early in the season when they benched Neptune, and it seemed like what's going on with the Subliners? Like why are they benching the guy that they bought from Florida in the off season? And I don't know like what the dynamics of the team were back then, but it seems like this team is very close now, and like maybe it was having to hunker down and be like, we have to win these matches. Like if we don't do super well in the qualifiers and we don't do well at the major, like our season's over. Like it doesn't matter what we did to this point. Like we can just go out and win now. I don't know if they were able to rally around like this cause of like we have to win like all of these matches, but something's clicked, and they're one of the best hardpoint teams in the game now, and it just seems crazy to say that considering how poorly they played earlier in the year. The one weakness I would say is they're not a great control team, and in the grand finals that did like you mentioned, that came back to bite them. They dropped two maps where they like obviously LAT is they played excellent in control. They were, I believe, 5-1 in control during the tournament, and LAT, they've been like so in Major Four qualifiers and Major Four tournament matches they've been 4-6 with Tuscan being their best control map, and Berlin they're 2-4 on. So it is a point of emphasis that I'm sure Revan and JP and the NYSL guys will really focus on and try to fix. But fortunately, control is the least important part of Call of Duty. So if they're able to continue to improve and maybe steal a control map here and there, especially in those grand final series, I think we could be seeing Subliners being that fifth and final team to win a tournament this year. But we'll see. It's going to be a toss up between these teams. The next team we got to talk about is the team that more people are fans of than any other, Optic Texas. They came into this tournament looking absolutely out of sorts. They were obviously they started in the losers bracket, so they were one of the 4 worst teams in the qualifiers. But they didn't really look that bad when it came to the major. They ended up finishing 4th. After a pretty strong losers bracket run with wins over Minnesota, Boston, and Toronto before losing to Atlanta in the losers bracket semifinals. What do you make of Optic's run back with Illy, who is trying to get back into form after missing about a month or month and a half due to a thumb injury?
I think obviously best case scenario for them would have been winning
Yeah.
the whole thing. But in the grand scheme of things, this is pretty close to the best case scenario for them based on the circumstances, the hand they were dealt, their position entering the tournament. They got to play multiple series, right? And that was something I brought up on the previous show was if Optic went one and done at this major, that's absolutely worst case scenario in the immediate future just because you get last place of the tournament. But it's also bad just in the grand scheme of things because they don't get multiple land reps heading into champs. Although they don't win this tournament, they come in 4th. Might be disappointing placing. Certainly disappointing placing for many Greenwall fans who expect Optic to win every single match they play.
Yeah.
Regardless of that, though, they got to play 4 series here with their full squad. Illy had some good moments. You know, all the guys. Scump had a game-winning play against Toronto. Was it Toronto? I don't know. There was one. It was a Tuscan hard point where he made a sneaky play for scrap time right at the end on P1. So like I can think of moments where all the guys on Optic were standing out in certain matches. So similar to what I was saying in New York, you know, if it's putting that all together that can really benefit them and they have time to try and work on it now. But I think this was, you know, for I don't want to say realistic because I feel like that's too harsh, but for open-minded Optic fans who weren't going into this tournament expecting them to 3-0 every single team they played, this is probably a good result in their eyes. The only thing you could maybe say is after they get a little heat under them and they get into that 4th place match against Faze, a team that they have, as far as I can remember, beaten every single time in Vanguard. You maybe like are feeling a little more confident and think they should win that one. So that could be a question mark. Obviously, if you're beating the quote unquote best team in the game all throughout the year, you don't want to just start losing to them at the end of the year. But you know that I feel like that's being a little nitpicky. I think based on all the circumstances and everything going on with Illy behind the scenes, and finally getting him back in the lineup, getting him playing reps on land with the intended 4-man lineup. I think 4th place is acceptable, and I think it's something they can build on heading into champs. I think they're the type of squad that's going to put in a lot of work over these next couple weeks right before champs. And certainly for the Greenwall's sake, they're going to be hoping that the work pays off in the end.
The one really good thing that has come of these late Illy matches. So I'm just looking at their final 7 matches of the season when Illy was back in the lineup. So 3 online, 4 on land. They were 8-2 in search. Optic historically has not been a great search team. Even in the first half of the year with Illy in the lineup, they were 14-11 in search. So not bad, obviously, but not dominant in any means. But the one thing that is, I don't know why. Maybe it's because control is, you know, that's the most Vanguard that can Vanguard. That mode is difficult to predict. But in the first half of the season with Illy, Optic was 17-2 in control. They were
on that streak,
yeah, they were the best control team in the league. And in the final 7 matches with Illy of the season, they were 1-6 in control. I don't know, like, you know, what that is. Maybe it's just going to take longer to get everybody, you know, in their positions, like being able to rotate effectively. Maybe the teamwork really has to be on point. for control for Optic. But that is like the fact that they've somehow improved so greatly in search, at least with the small sample size we have, and then done so poorly in control. I don't know like what to make of that. Especially, we've said it before, but control is the least important game mode. You only play it once in a best of 5 series, so it's not the end of the world if you're not a great control team. But it's also like we've seen with London, it can be a hindrance. Like London came into this event and they were winning hard points, they were winning searches, but they could not win control. And not winning control can lead to a snowball effect, and that snowball can eventually become a reverse sweep, and it's obviously not great if you can't win one of the 3 game modes. I'm sure Rambo and Sender and all of the Optic guys are working on that to try to figure out what do we need to do to at least go 50-50 or something on controls. But I just thought it was interesting that this team that has been good but not great in search has suddenly become a very, very good search team, and their control play is pretty much falling off the map. I'm not sure what to make of it, but it'll be interesting to watch to see if Optic makes some pretty big adjustments going into champs. Which team do you want to talk about next? Because we got the top 4, and all those teams have qualified for champs. They look like I would say the 4 contenders. I mean, everybody's contender in Vanguard, but those 4 teams seem to be on top of my mind than anyone else. But is there a specific team that you want to talk about next?
I think we may as well just talk about London. You kind of,
All
gave
right.
us a little segue there. Disappointing performance out of London at this major, just based on their performance in the qualifiers heading into this one. Kind of as you were alluding to, they were struggling in control,
Mm-hmm.
and that actually they went 1-1 in control as far as I know at this event. So, not necessarily the reason they lost, but it certainly could be something they're going to look to improve on, just because, especially in the opening series, against Toronto, London, it's a 250 to 249 win, map 1 of the tournament. I remember that now. I wasn't remember. The first map of the tournament was nuts. It came down to the wire. It was like the audio was a little messed up too. So like I can't think of their name. Bricey and Ton were commenting, and they were like 2 seconds ahead of the action. So they were like, "Oh my god, this guy gets a 2-piece, and then this guy gets a 2-piece," and it was happening like a couple seconds behind. So it was kind of funny, but it was still an electric ending to the first map of the tournament. Um, and London then takes the following search 6-4. They go up 2-0, and control Toronto takes it 3-0. Toronto ends up reverse sweeping, and I'm not going to say the 3-0 loss in control is the only reason they get the reverse sweep, but certainly, if a team like London wasn't having these like noteworthy struggles in the mode, you could maybe say like if they're more competitive in it, it might not be as big of a momentum shift, but you have to say like a 3-0 in control is kind of like, especially after losing the first 2 maps, that's kind of eye opening. So Toronto get the reverse sweep here, which was pretty surprising for probably the majority of people who were assuming London was going to continue to play as well as they were in the qualifiers. But then they end up playing the Gorillas, which is another match based on recent performances. You're expecting London to win, and Gorillas take that one 3-2 by winning both hard points. London actually wins the control in this one 3-2, but they only won games 2 and 3. LAG goes 1-4-5 to take this one. So that's kind of eye-opening in the opposite end of the spectrum, just because London was so dominant in hardpoint heading into this major, and then they lose 2 to a team like LAG, who certainly, despite having a small sample size with this latest roster, I wouldn't put them like up at the top of a list in terms of hardpoint teams if I had to like rattle off a list off the top of my head. So that's kind of, obviously getting last place tournament before champs isn't great. And certainly below expectations set for London just based off of their performance in the qualifiers heading into this. But we have seen, again, that goes back to our theme of inconsistencies for multiple teams. And maybe, London's able to figure out something over these next couple of weeks to get back to that strong form. But we're just going to have to see, because, if it was still that same only struggling control, maybe, it's not as concerning for some fans. But um, certainly losing 2 hard points to LAG for a team that was super dominant in hard point just a couple weeks ago um, is kind of a red flag in my eyes, and we'll just have to see how they're able to respond to champs.
Oh yeah, it's definitely a red flag that they they came in. I believe they were 9-1 in hardpoint. London was in the qualifiers, and then they were 5-1 in search. For them to lose both of their series is pretty crazy. I looked it up. LAG. So this is including their one match in Major 3, the Major 4 qualifiers, and then their 2 matches in Major 4. LAG were 6-8 in hardpoint. They were 4-7 in search, 3-5 in control. Like I've said it several times on the show, LAG was really really bad this year. One like I they won Major 2, but they really didn't do anything of note outside of that tournament. So losing to them is a red flag in of itself for me. I really can't excuse it. Like you can say Vanguard or whatever, but it's like this is on LAN and you should try like LAG's not good, like even on LAN. Like the next series, Faze stomps them 3-0. Like it's over for them. So for me, it makes me think that London is not a true contender. These 2 series, Toronto is not a great hardpoint team either. Like Toronto is a better team than LAG for sure, but I don't see Toronto as a particularly consistent team in general, and in hardpoint they haven't been very impressive. So for London, I don't really know what to make of those, 9-1 hardpoint map count or 5-1 search when you lose 2 best of 5s back to back to teams that, aren't really contenders. LAG's not even going to be at champs, and Toronto, for how talented I think this roster is and how much I really like that they stuck by their roster for the entire season. I don't know how strong they are. I don't know if they're a championship contender either. So I would say that my stock in London has really went down during this event, like more than most teams, just because I expected them to beat Ultra round 1, and then I did probably expect them to beat or to lose to Faze, but I expect a lot of teams to lose to Faze. That's not really a shot at anybody, but I'm not sure what to make of London. I think that they might be in a little bit of trouble going to champs.
Yep.
Next we should talk about let's talk about Minnesota, because I want to talk about them just quickly. We don't need to spend a lot of time on them because we'll give like an in memoriam to those other teams that didn't make champs. But I want to talk about them specifically because they were so close to winning 2 matches. In the same way that London was, they lost 2 game 5s, but Minnesota, it really, really hurts because they win either of those 2 matches, that could be the difference between not making champs and making champs, especially since they played New York in round 1 and they lose game 5. I believe that was the reverse sweep, if I'm not mistaken. So they lose game 5 to New York, and then they lose game 5 to Optic in the losers bracket, and that pretty much ends their run and their hopes at making champs. What do you like? Do you think Minnesota was just a really good online team that wasn't able to make it to champs, or like do you think it was something else? Because like they went 5-0 in the Major 3 qualifiers. I think they went 3-2, I believe, in the Major 4 qualifiers, and then they lost 4 straight major tournament matches. So what do you think of Minnesota?
Yeah, I really don't have too much to think about Minnesota. Um, I was high on them in the online qualifiers, in particular. just because that's what we saw them go 5-0 once Havoc joins, then they struggle at the major, and then the next set of online qualifiers, I was still predicting them to win a lot of matches. I know I picked them to like win over Optic before when they still had Pro Loop playing. And I really don't know what the difference is. Obviously, it's a tough break. I think I saw a breaking point tweet like this is the first champs that Attach is missing in his career, which is kind of shocking to think about just because we were thinking of Krim potentially missing out. Obviously that's a little bit longer than Attach, but Attach had been, he won in AW. That was his first champs. So that's 2015, and so 2015 to 2021 he was in champs. That's a pretty solid run, especially once you add in the franchise era. But yeah, I think it is worth mentioning too. There was some I don't want to say shenanigans, or there was some stuff potentially going on behind the scenes with Minnesota. We saw Thursday, the day of the tournament, they signed a sub, and Crone was tweeting that potentially Standy might not have played. So I don't know if it was COVID or what the rumors were behind that, but there was obviously talks about something going on with Minnesota, and maybe that played a factor in them struggling. But they certainly, they opened up with 2 map wins against New York. They just weren't able to close that one out, and I think that affects them. Obviously, playing Optic in the following round is a tough matchup, but they came out again, winning on Bokage. That's pretty impressive. Just Optic was able to close things out in the end there. So yeah, I think it's a disappointing result just based off of the immediate success we saw in the online matches in particular once Havoc joined. But beyond that, I really don't have much to say. I think it's kind of it's gonna be weird thinking about Attach not being a champs this year. Guys, Priesta obviously not as long of a run, but he would have been a champ since at least World War
20.
II, if I'm remembering
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So regardless, the solid players on the team. It just for whatever reason towards the end of the year it didn't work out. And it'll definitely be interesting to see what they do in the off season. I think they're gonna have to make some tough decisions because I feel like without getting too far ahead of ourselves here, I think there's Attach is a guy you can build a franchise around. Just based off of performance, Standy is a guy who's played well for them, and they might want to keep him and build around him. And even Priesta, he might not be the flashiest player statistically or anything like that, but he's a solid guy who can do the job. He's shown throughout his career he can do it with a sub, do it as a flex, do it as an AR. So he's a very valuable, role player, I guess you would say, as a common sports analogy. And he could be a guy they build around too. So I could see Minnesota going in multiple directions this offseason, and certainly I'm not expecting them to stick as a roster as we saw them do last season after the Minnesota Miracle.
Yeah, it would be a real surprise if they stuck with this roster just because it's it's really not common for most teams in the league to stick with their rosters, but especially a team that didn't make champs, meaning you're a bottom 4 team. It would be pretty surprising to see if see these 4 players stick together with Minnesota. Let's talk about Toronto, a team that did make it to champs. A team that really had an up and down regular season, especially in respawn game modes. It's been a little bit of a tough time for them, but they beat London, like we mentioned, and then they get swept by LAT before dropping down the losers bracket and losing in 5 games to Optic in losers bracket quarterfinals. I mean, it's kind of what I expect out of Toronto. I didn't expect them to beat London, but like a top 6 or a top 8 finish, to me doesn't really seem out of the ordinary for the way the Ultras played this season. Last season, yeah, that would have been really disappointing. They were a great team last year. I think they're a pretty good team this year, depending on the matchup. A team that they're kind of even with in their game modes, then yeah, probably they can win that match. But against the top teams, and I guess LAT is a top team now, which is really weird. They just don't. They're just not that team right now, and I don't know if they're going to be able to get there. They peaked really late last year, and they were able to have that incredible run. And of course, they lost in the Minnesota Miracle, but they were able to get to Champs Grand Finals and all that. So, I'm interested to see what they do. But what kind of confidence level are you at with Toronto heading into Champs?
I think it's hard to be very confident in Toronto by any stretch. Um, it is an impressive win for them over London. Obviously, I picked Toronto there, but that's going with the pick against London strategy, so I don't know how much weight you can put into that. Jokes aside, though, the most important thing here is that it's a close series for them against Optic. Comes down to Game 5, Round 11, and that's their first round matchup at Champs is Optic versus Toronto.
Mm.
So we're going to see this matchup they just lost in Game 5, Round 11 we're going to see it in a couple of weeks to kick off Champs. So all regardless of whatever's happened throughout the earlier parts of the season for them with inconsistencies here and there, still think they're a super talented team. And if they're able to watch the VODs back, maybe change up just one round even could be the difference in this matchup. It certainly should be a very entertaining first round matchup again. And yeah, I just, Toronto won the game 2 search and the control in that Optic matchup. So if they had won in game 5, it would have been kind of the 2-3-5 that you come to expect from Toronto at this point, just based on their hard point struggles throughout the year. But who knows? Maybe they're able to find a hard point map and sneak it in to the best of 5, something they're able to work on over these next 2 weeks. Or maybe it's, at this point with Toronto, based on their hard point struggles, maybe they go to a map that they haven't seen any success on. They're like, well, it can't get any worse, right? We got to try something new here, maybe. That just could be one alternate approach. But yeah, end of the day, I think Toronto's lineup is still super talented. And it was obviously a very close matchup against Optic that didn't go their way in the end, but they have another shot against that same team in just a couple weeks here at Champs.
Last team that made Champs. I mean, they're not the 8th seed, but last team that we're going to talk about, the Boston Breach. They made a late season roster change, brought in Vivid for Capsidal. They did end up Vivid lost his revenge match and winners round 1 against Florida, game 5. But they end up beating Seattle in the loser bracket and then lose to Optic in round 2. No harm, no foul for them though, because they were in a somewhat comfortable position to make Champs heading into the tournament. So not a huge loss for them to lose to Optic. What'd you make of Boston in their 3 matches in this major?
Well, we also haven't really talked about Seattle too much, which
Oh,
is
yeah, I
the
forgot about them. Yep.
last team at Champs, but I can tie it in here just because Boston is the team that sends Seattle home, and Seattle was the previous major champion. We only get to see them play one match here against Boston, a team you expect them to beat most likely, and Boston's able to pull it out. Seattle takes the Bokich hardpoint and Tuscan control, but Boston goes 2-4-5. The Berlin hardpoint was 250 to 248. I don't really remember that for some reason, so I don't remember why it came down to the wire or anything like that, but obviously it's close nonetheless. But the 2 searches were 6-3 Boston and 6-2 Boston, so could be something Seattle might have to work on heading into Champs. Obviously, a last place finish following a major championship, they might have several things they're going to look to work on to improve there. But obviously, disappointing result for Seattle due to just the recent success at the last major. But Boston, they did look strong in the online qualifiers, going 4-1. And like you said, Vivid loses the revenge match there, but they were able to at least win the match against Seattle, which I think was the one that gave them the points they needed to actually qualify for Champs. which at the end of the day is the most important thing for all the teams competing, but especially for Boston, man. Said it multiple times on this show, just anything beyond last place is really good for Boston due to the situation they were entering the league as the last team, being the last, dog at the bowl to pick the scraps or pick their roster for the season. Um, I think this changed with Vivid. As much as I've liked Capsule at moments throughout the year, I think Vivid and Nero work really well together. And it might just be because they're both hyper aggressive, which could have some drawbacks in some situations with pacing with Methods and TJ. But, the most important thing is that this change helped them get into champs, and now they're playing with house money basically at this point, right? They really have nothing to lose heading into champs, because I think many people at the start of the season might not have even expected them to be there. So, I mean, we talked about how cool of a storyline it would have been for New York to win this major, make the Cinderella run to champs. I think it would be a pretty even crazier storyline for Boston to win champs,
Yeah.
because technically that would give Doug Center Martin a ring.
Does it though? I mean, they
It
might
would
give him a
give him a
ring.
ring.
Yeah.
I mean, Tommy got a ring when the Empire won.
Yeah. So Seattle and Boston, Seattle really didn't have to do anything this tournament. They didn't really even need to show up, I guess, to qualify because of the way things worked out. I'm concerned about Seattle. To go from Major 3 champions beating Faze in the grand finals to pretty much getting stomped, like not stomped by Boston specifically, but losing 5-6 matches, like that's pretty concerning, even if the bulk of those were online. So I'm not too confident in Seattle. I'm still confident in my boy Pred that he'll win Rookie of the Year, but I don't think the team in general inspires a lot of confidence right now. In the Breach, I think they're an interesting team. Earlier in the year, they were a solid, probably third or fourth place team in the league, and they kind of fell because they had that rough stretch. But if they're able to, I think if they get top 6 or top 4 at champs, I think that's great. Like that is a win for the organization, a win for the Breach, because like you said, with the hand that they were dealt, with how late they were able to get in, just making champs over teams that have been in the league for a few years and have the resources. And Minnesota, they came in with a roster this season, like a completely built roster that had won a tournament last year. To beat them out, that's a pretty impressive feat in of itself for Boston. But they're gonna have a tough road ahead of them at champs. So the bottom 4 teams, we talked about Minnesota a little bit, but the bottom 4 teams that did not make champs, Minnesota, LAG, the Paris Legion, and who else am I missing? The LAG. Oh, and the Florida Mutineers, our very consistently inconsistent team, the Florida Mutineers. They actually tied with New York in points for the season. They both finished at 160, but because of tiebreakers, New York ended up making champs over Florida, which is got to be a heartbreaker for the Mutineers with how well they played at specific points in the season. But it's not good to be inconsistent. That's kind of the thing. New York was consistent in that they did not win major matches, and then they were like, all right, let's be consistent in winning major matches this major, and that's how it worked out for them. Florida, they were just up and down the entire year. Their late season roster change just really didn't work out. They fell just too short. If they win that match against Faze, or if they're able to beat the Subliners in the winners bracket, obviously that would have really helped their chances at making champs, but it just didn't work out this time. LAG, I I'm very much not an LAG fan at the moment. I a really bad season for them. Other than they made quite a bit of money at Major Two, but that's how it works out, I guess. Um, you know,
We can talk about this at another time. Didn't
yeah,
want to cut you off, but
no, we get to talk about it next week if we do a show next week. We definitely just talk about these 4 teams and like what they need to do, because we do have a off week before we get to champs in 2
well,
weeks.
I'm not going to be here, so we're not doing a show next week unless you do one on your own.
I might do one on my own then.
Only thing I was going to say was, I guess it's a topic for the off season, and something you can ponder. But can you classify LAG season as a quote unquote bad season with a major victory? They win 1 out of 4 tournaments. Sure, they don't do well at the other ones, but at the end of the day, a chip is a chip, and they still did win a tournament. I don't know where I stand on that argument, so I'm not saying we need to talk about it now, but I think it's an interesting question, because there aren't a lot of other comparisons. Like you can't like say, and I guess you could. You can't even compare it to like winning 1 playoff game in like the NBA or NFL and then not winning the Super Bowl, because that's not the case. They won a whole tournament, went on a super impressive loser bracket run. It's just nothing else went their way, and they didn't play well at the other tournaments. So I guess classifying LAG's tournament is a topic for another time.
Yeah, it's a weird
Classifying their
season.
season.
Yeah, it's a weird season to look at because they basically did nothing outside of this one tournament. Like they earned money at like one qualifier. Like it's pretty amazing that they were able to get so close to making champs based off of very much just one tournament. Obviously they won it, but it's an interesting topic. I think we can talk about it in the off season, because we'll have a lot of time to fill. But yeah, LAG are one of the teams that didn't make it. Florida did not make it. Minnesota did not make it. And our Paris Legion, rest in peace. They will be moving to Las Vegas with. I tweeted it this weekend. They set records. This was a record-setting year for the Paris Legion. They they had the worst win-loss record and the worst map count win-loss record in CDL history, for an entire season. They won 8% of their matches, which it seems high for them, to be honest with you. But they went 2-23 on the season. I don't think they won the last 2.5 months of the season. So a pretty tough year for the Paris Legion, and they will be. I don't know if they're just going to name it the Vegas Legion or whatever next year, but they are moving to Las Vegas. I mean, what a horrible, horrible, horrible team that we saw. I don't really blame all of it on the roster, but 2-23. That is ridiculous. That is,
That's Cleveland Browns bad.
well, almost, but a really bad team. Not a Don't really have a fan base, a huge fan base to speak of. That's where they lose out to the Browns. The Browns have very loyal, stupid fans that like them despite them being really bad. The Paris Legion, I don't believe they ever played a match with a French player in their roster. I believe they might have had Brezzi on the roster, but I don't think he ever played. So they did all of this. They played 3 seasons in the CDL, and they literally never played with a French player. And other than a somewhat successful season 1, where I think they made the finals of a like one of those home series events. I think they did that once. They've been really disappointing, and I'm just disgusted by the Paris Legion, and I'm glad that they're moving to Vegas, because then there's not even the illusion that we have like another European team. Like London is a true European team. Like they field a completely like British roster. That's awesome. Love that. Paris was not Paris. They were like like the North Carolina Legion or something. It was bad. It was a really disappointing year for them. They finished it out with a 3-2 loss to Atlanta Faze. Any last words for the Paris Legion and these other teams that did not make champs and we will not be talking about when we ultimately do preview champs?
Nope, I don't think anything we need to say about Paris anymore that we haven't said already.
Yeah. Any other thoughts or concerns before we wrap up the show? Because we went through the entire tournament. I don't know if we congratulated them, but congratulations to the LA Thieves. A really big win. I believe their first win as like the LA Thieves, 100 Thieves. Definitely won a tournament or two.
Hunting Thieves won in Black Ops 4, but
Yeah,
not LA Thieves.
yeah, so LA Thieves, their first win, our fourth and final major champion. Any thoughts before I wrap up the show?
Um, I will just say, just because it was the one team we kind of glossed over from the ones that didn't make champs, for Florida, will be interesting to see what they do moving forward next year. They haven't obviously been afraid to make roster changes. I feel like they're in a position though where they either have to just completely scrap everything, rebuild, um, or which what I think is more likely is they pick between either Skies and Awakening and build around one of them. Um, Both of them have been on Florida their entire CDL careers, if I'm remembering correctly,
Yeah,
because Awakening came in through partway through MW, and Skies was on that team to start the season. So will be interesting to see what they do in the off season. But yeah, just wanted to bring that up real quick. And we don't have to talk too much about it, but just to briefly preview it before we wrap things up, the champs bracket. The top half of the bracket is Faze versus Subliners, which we talked about. Then Ravens versus Seattle, which is kind of interesting based on recent performances for both of those teams. And then the bottom half of the bracket is Optic versus Ultra, and then Thieves versus Boston. So that's the 8-team bracket for champs. All the teams are starting in winners bracket round one, unlike in past years of CDL champs where they did like the tiered buy system, like Dallas Empire / Atlanta Thieves, Atlanta Faze. One of them got like more buys or whatever. I remember during like MW champs and stuff, and
yeah,
with none of that this year. Everyone's starting in the same spot in the winners bracket and just traditional 8-team double elimination bracket.
yep. We'll probably won't be back, or we won't be back next week, but we'll be back the week after to preview champs. We'll go through each team, give our thoughts on their prospects and their chances of winning what is the most important event of the year. I believe this is a $2.5 million event, maybe more. I might be off a little bit, but it's the best event for the season, the most lucrative event for the players, and something that I'm really excited for. This season's kind of flown by at different stretches, but it feels weird that we're here and that the 8 teams are set for the season. So those 8 teams: Atlanta Faze, New York Subliners, London Royal Ravens, Seattle Surge, Optic Texas, Toronto Ultra, LA Thieves, and the Boston Breach. Those teams we will be talking about more when we come back in 2 weeks or so to preview CDL champs. But yeah, that about does it for the show. Make sure to like, subscribe, or follow the feed wherever you're listening or watching on. Make sure to give us a 5-star rating on Apple and Spotify as well. Follow us on Twitter. He is at JBink with 2 Ks. I'm at Preston Byers, and the podcast Twitter is at Ego Chall Podcast. The next show is probably in 2 weeks, so end of July, beginning of August. The champs tournament. I'm trying to look up the date real quick because
First week of August.
yeah, so we'll be doing a show before then. Obviously, we don't want to miss out on previewing champs. But champs officially starts on August 4th. So that is a Thursday. So expect this podcast to return before August 4th.
Yeah,
Hope
probably like the first or second or third, depending on softball when I get back.
Yeah, so softball will dictate when we do our champs preview. But we thank you guys for listening and watching. We really appreciate your support. The season's almost over. We hope you stick with us at least for the next few weeks, so you can listen to our champs preview and then our champs recap, and really our season recap will be coming up, within a month. But thank you guys for listening, and take it away, Bink.
Yep, as always. Thank you guys for tuning in to the live show. For those of you who are here, uh, Preston's pointed out that past couple episodes for listens overall have been doing pretty well. So thank you guys for the support in all forms, whether you're watching live or on YouTube or listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever, all that good stuff. Thank you for showing your support no matter what. As always, if you have any criticism, comments, feedback, whatever it may be, we're open to it. So let us know. You already listed our Twitters off. You can reach us there. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this past tournament. I know I certainly did. And I'm looking forward to the big one coming up in 2 weeks here. So we will be back to talk about that then. And as always, remember to send the chow.